and welcome to the weekly rushes. Your rush through all the movie and streaming news of, well, normally the past week, but this week is going to be bits and bobs on the last 2 weeks because we weren't here, because I was busy doing a downward dog and going, I have got my coffee, Sexpresso, don't you know? Oh, that's good. Oh, the fragrant coffee bean, the fragrant aroma of coffee Arabica just blended with my soul and my spiritual well-being. Obviously, the biggest event over the last couple of weeks has probably been the release of the Elvis, I'm loath to say biopic, because it's a film about really Elvis's manager, played by Tom Hanks. So I am still yet to see it. We're going to obviously be seeing it hopefully sometime over this weekend. But Elvis has been kind of, lots of press and publicity, lots of chatter about Austin Butler, Baz Luhrmann, Tom Hanks, etc., has all been in the press. But obviously, there's always some pretty salacious news at the top of the weekly rushes. And this week, I'm leading with the story of full Monty star Hugo Spear. Now, for those of you, well, who doesn't know what the Full Monty was? It's that classic, almost cult classic 1997 comedy hit in which a group of unemployed steelworkers essentially decide to strip to earn some money, and it became an enormous crowd pleaser. I think it earned somewhere in the region of 200 to 250 million pounds at the box office, which is no mean feat for essentially a low-budget British film. Well, Disney Plus are making a series, a follow-up series, that focuses on the same society. It looks at the same characters, obviously 25 years on or whatever it is, and it looks at these characters through the eyes of their children, their grandchildren, and presumably the notoriety that these original characters sort of created for themselves around the fact that they strip naked. Well, anyway, one of the original members of the cast, one of the stars of the film, Hugo Spear, has been fired from this new Disney Plus series, and the irony of this is not lost on Disney Plus bosses, who have had to fire him because essentially they've had to sack one of the top stars from this rebooted series, essentially for stripping naked and answering the door to his trailer with no clothes on. A runner came, she knocked on the door of his trailer, he answered with no clothes on, stayed standing with no clothes on, and invited her in. Hugo Spear himself vigorously denies this, and allegedly has said through a representative, he said, all actors walk around their trailers stark bollock naked. And I was chatting about this with Nadia, and she said all actors and actresses at some point are naked in their trailer, but if there's a knock at the door, you have the same social obligation as you do with answering the front door to popping off some clothes or getting, putting a towel around you or something like that. So he had apparently been warned for allegedly walking around the trailer naked before, but he's now been given the boot after a woman in her 20s said this happened when she knocked on his door. I suppose one of the other arguments he could possibly be using, or you could use, I suppose, I'm not suggesting he should or that it's right, is that he was methoding, that if the blurred lines between what he's doing on camera versus what he does in his own sort of private space, I suppose he could argue that he was stripping or something like that. But obviously there was another aspect to this, so it's yet another example of inappropriate behaviour on set. There's just a deep irony that it's on the set of a follow-up series to a film in which all the main characters took all their clothes off. J.K. Rowling has been in the press again, inadvertently. She hasn't said anything, she hasn't done anything. Warner Brothers have actually come out as standing alongside J.K. Rowling, which I think is quite significant. It's quite a significant news story, and that you rarely hear anyone sort of saying, yes, J.K. Rowling has some meaningful or positive responsibility for the entire Harry Potter franchise. It seems that since her trans comments and her trans views, it's just hate time. She's essentially been cancelled in so many aspects. Even the cast have turned against her in many ways. But in a recent sort of event where they were expanded, a recent sort of publicity event where they were expanding the Warner Brothers studio tour in London, one of the actors from the franchise, Tom Felton, was asked a question by Sky News, of all people, regarding the fact of, is it odd that in a sense all you actors are now the mouthpiece for this franchise and the Harry Potter realm, whereas J.K. Rowling's sort of taking a step into the background. And the weird thing that happened in this public sort of event, or this PR event, was that a PR representative, but a third-party PR representative, someone employed by Warner Brothers who wasn't part of Warner Brothers, stepped in and said, you mustn't ask that question, you must stop, basically suggesting that J.K. Rowling is not connected to Warner or Tom Felton, and so therefore it's not relevant to the piece. So essentially a PR team, a third-party third-party PR team stepped on a Sky News question about J.K. Rowling and basically wanted to say, don't even talk about J.K. Rowling. She's not part of the equation. She's not even part of this, even though she created the entire universe. She's not part of it. Well, Warner Brothers pushed back on this, and they said, I think it might be one of the first times they've publicly supported her in such sort of strong terms. Actually, Warner Brothers said Warner Brothers has enjoyed a creative, productive, and fulfilling partnership with J.K. Rowling. She's one of the world's most accomplished storytellers, and we're proud to be the studio to bring her vision, characters, and stories to life. So essentially, Warner Brothers saying, and I think there has to be some balance here. It's down to a matter of opinion, isn't it, what she said and whether it's right and whether it's wrong. She is responsible for this entire universe, and you can't really talk about Harry Potter and pretend that J.K. Rowling had no part in it. Ezra Miller, I know you might be getting sick. There he goes, there he goes, there he goes. Ezra Miller he's not done anything new, although there are all sorts of news stories popping around. They're popping up on all sorts of TikTok accounts and things like that. The girls were mentioning about Ezra Miller, star of The Flash, the fact that his life story, what's happening to him seems to be like the story of a crazy sort of road trip on the run film. It's kind of like bizarre, and it's sort of like there's an element of a cult sort of thing going on there too, because of this young Native American girl that he's essentially befriended and been close to since the age of 12, who's now an adult, and is there a bit of Stockholm syndrome going on there? Anyway, obviously he's been in the headlines for all sorts of fracas, all sorts of kind of assaults and all sorts of things like that. If you don't know who Ezra Miller is and you don't know The Flash, he kind of came to fame in The Perks of Being a Wallflower, and he was also in the brilliant thriller We Need to Talk About Kevin. But two of his victims, two of the people who've been assaulted or essentially choke held, one of them, two people who he's harassed have stepped forward to talk about their experiences. One woman who was the victim of a choking attack outside a bar in Iceland in 2020 said, "I think it was just fun and games, but then it suddenly wasn't. All of a sudden, they're on top of me, choking me, still screaming in my face if I want to fight." This is Ezra Miller and their friends. She said the actor, who's non-binary, put her in a chokehold before throwing her to the ground. But the woman blamed Miller's friends as much as Ezra Miller. Another woman was speaking to Variety. She also talked about the fact that Ezra Miller harassed and seemingly attempted to break down her apartment door. She said, "I did not feel safe," and she recalled how Ezra Miller refused to leave her apartment after the woman said they couldn't smoke inside. They called her a Nazi and a transphobic piece of shit, and eventually left after she called the police. So the more and more details are coming out, and as I say, there's this story at the moment where Ezra Miller, I think he has a sort of homestead where a number of kind of women are sort of hanging out there in a sort of almost like a cult-like way, and there are sort of handguns everywhere, and at one point one child, apparently allegedly a baby, has been seen with a bullet, chewing on a bullet in its mouth. There's this portrait coming out of this incredibly chaotic, messy, mental breakdown, control issues, all sorts of weird shit going on. Of course, this presents an enormous headache, as we've said before, for Warner Brothers as they move ever closer towards the 2023 release of The Flash. What will happen? Presumably they absolutely won't work with him again, but how are they going to manage the PR for this? Are they going to just perhaps put the films directly onto HBO Max, cut their losses, and perhaps shunt something up, further forward up the kind of conveyor belt? Weird one, this. Woody Allen was interviewed with Alec Baldwin this week on Instagram, and apparently, Woody Allen, not one for being on social media, created his account not long before doing a brief chat on an Insta Live with Alec Baldwin. Apparently the live chat kept breaking out, but it was an opportunity for Alec Baldwin, obviously still, recovering from the aftermath, or still in the aftermath of the terrible Helena Hutchins shooting incident on the set of the film Rust. But Woody Allen, for some reason, Alec Baldwin, who's worked with Woody Allen, obviously in films, countless films in the past, wanted to do an interview with Woody Allen, and they meticulously avoided all issues or topics surrounding Rust, and they avoided all the issues surrounding the contentious, topic of Woody Allen's, alleged abuse of his children and his marriage, and he simply talked about his approach to filmmaking, his passion for filmmaking. And we are, if you can, put into one side for a moment the Woody Allen sexual abuse allegations, none of which have actually come to any fruition. Once again, it's that sort of thing of innocent until proven guilty, surely. He was a prolific filmmaker. I think he made something like one film a year for 50 years. and he talked about the fact that he's possibly going to make one or maybe another film. But like you said, getting insurance, getting cast, getting creatives, getting producers in place to do this is very, very hard. He said, quote, "I'll probably make at least one more movie, but a lot of the thrill is gone because it doesn't have the whole cinema effect." And of course, he's talking about the fact that so much of filmmaking now and films go straight to streaming. So Woody Allen's been out there talking and chatting, and it's weird whenever I hear Woody Allen. I don't have a fondness for what his potential alleged behaviour has been at all, but you can't again ignore the fact that he made some sensationally funny of their time. I mean, you knew that when a Woody Allen picture was coming out each year, you were going to be made to think and you were going to be made to laugh, and it wasn't often that you could laugh in an intelligent fashion at the cinema. He was often in them in a very self-effacing way. I mean, most youngsters now probably don't even know what a Woody Allen film is. Whereas for my generation, the idea of a Woody Allen film was often an absolute treat. Casting news and new projects news. Dune Part 2 is obviously moving along. A fantastic cast. Well, added to the cast is Léa Seydoux. I never know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. She's going to be playing Lady Margot in the Dune sequel. She's obviously to be seen soon in David Cronenberg's Crimes of the Future, which looks like an absolutely gritty, filthy, disturbing and controversial body horror film. She's also in Mia Hanson's One Fine Morning. She's recently been in The French Dispatch, and she was also obviously brilliant as James Bond's love interest in No Time to Die. She's obviously, she's coming to Dune. She's joining a stellar cast that already includes people like Timothée Chalamet, who was already there from the first film, Rebecca Ferguson, Zendaya, but also lining it out are new characters played by Florence Pugh, Christopher Walken, fantastic, and Austin Butler, who obviously, his turn as Elvis at Warner Brothers has made Warner Brothers go, yeah, you can do something in Dune too. So looking forward to that. So Léa Seydoux joining the Dune cast. Sebastian Stan, Winter Soldier, you will know him as Winter Soldier. You'll also know him as the man with a talking penis from Pam and Tommy on Disney Plus, the story of Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee's sex tape, etc., etc. Sebastian Stan is to star alongside a cracking actress, Renata Reinsver. Again, don't know if I'm pronouncing her surname correctly. She was the star, obviously, of The Worst Person in the World, which is absolutely sensational in that. Sebastian Stan, Renata Reinsver and Adam Pearson are appearing together in an A24 movie, psychological thriller, called A Different Man. And the log line for this, or the synopsis, is an intriguing one. This is directed by Aaron Schimberg. But the film follows a character called Edward, played by Stan, who's an outcast seeking a new life and a fresh start. After he undergoes getting facial reconstructive surgery, he becomes fixated on a man who stars as him in a stage production based on his former life. So obviously he plays a character who had to get facial reconstructive surgery, and the reason for that is obviously so sort of topical that a story or a film or a stage production has been made of why it happened. And so he becomes fixated on a man who stars as him, a different man playing himself. So, double identities, doppelgangers, all that kind of malarkey. I think that's going to be rich. So Sebastian Stan, I like Sebastian Stan. I think he's becoming a sort of, quite a layered actor. Another A24 project that's quite exciting and gaining speed and tempo is the new Kristen Stewart film called Love Lies Bleeding. And this is directed by Rose Glass, who was the director of the British horror, sort of religious horror, spiritual horror, Saint Maud, Rose Glass. This film has now cast Dave Franco. Now, Dave Franco is James Franco, who obviously has been caught up in all that sort of awfulness around his, acting school and sexual assault and what have you, and all that kind of stuff. Dave Franco is the younger brother of James Franco. He appears in the James Franco directed film, The Disaster Artist, the film that was based on the sort of almost such an atrocious indie filmmaker. He makes sort of cult. He's made a cult classic called The Room, which was just an absolute disaster. The character's name was Tommy Wiseau. Tommy Wiseau. I think you'll know him if you're into any sort of cult indie screenings. The Prince Charles Cinema shows this film all the time. Anyway, Dave Franco appeared in that film alongside James Franco, and he was absolutely excellent. He was brilliant in it. Brilliant Dave Franco. He's, I think, a very underestimated actor. Well, he's joining, as I say, Kristen Stewart and Ed Harris in this new film called Love Lies Bleeding. And again, the logline for this is really intriguing and interesting. We've talked about it before. It's set within the ultra-competitive world of bodybuilding. It looks like Kristen Stewart is playing she's a lesbian. She's the butch lesbian of a romantic partnership, and essentially it's taking place within the competitive world of female bodybuilding, and as they say, fueled by ego, desire, and the American dream. It sounds like a really rich premise for some sort of really sweaty, potentially erotic, potentially existential. I wonder if Ed Harris is in there as a sort of trainer. Ed Harris's skull-like head is always something to be marvelled at within these projects. So Dave Franco is joining Kristen Stewart in Love Lies Bleeding. We've talked a lot about Millie Bobby Brown in recent weeks. We talked about her on the last Weekly Rushes in terms of a possible connection with a new Star Wars project, series or film, potentially. Could she be a Leia? A sort of teenager, young adult Leia, or could she be a completely new character? This generation's Leia, we don't know. She's working with, my God, she's plugged into some of the biggest franchise makers on the planet, the Duffer Brothers, Star Wars, and now the Russo brothers, the guys who brought us the Avengers, etc. They have their own production outfit. They recently made The Grey Man, I believe, for Netflix. Anyway, the Russo brothers' next film, The Electric State, looks like they're signing up Millie Bobby Brown to star in this. Rumour mill is that she could be starring alongside or opposite Chris Pratt, who's in discussion to try and board the project. You know, the Russo brothers command enormous budgets for their films. You could argue whether the budgets are in fact bear any relationship to the complexity of the films they made. But yeah, I think the Tom Holland film was in the region of 200 million, and I think The Grey Man is in the region of 200 million too. The film, called The Electric State, is based on, and here's the logline, a novel by Simon Stalenhag, and it's set in a sort of retro futuristic past where an orphan teenager, played by Millie Bobby Brown, travels the American West with a sweet but mysterious robot and an eccentric drifter, perhaps Chris Pratt maybe, in search of her younger brother. Obviously Millie Bobby Brown can be seen at the moment in the new second part, the final tranche of Stranger Things programs that have come out, and she's obviously got Enola Holmes 2 coming out, and she's also got the Damsel in Distress film, Damsel, coming out, so she's been very busy. And now she can add the Russo brothers to those that she follows on Instagram. Barbara Broccoli, the producers of James Bond, obviously we've talked here a lot, we've speculated a lot about Idris Elba. You know, it serves the James Bond 007 sort of machine well to have all this speculation, all this chit-chat. It keeps attention focused on it. It keeps, you know, it's a bit like those years between Star Wars films. There's a lot of guessing. How are they going to do it? Didn't he die? If he's dead, is it going to be James Bond proper, or is it just going to be another Agent 007? All that kind of stuff. Anyway, Barbara Broccoli at a recent event said she kind of dampened speculation on whether they're about to choose Idris or any of the other contenders that we've been discussing as possible new James Bonds. But producer Barbara Broccoli has said, unfortunately, it's going to be at least 2 years before the next 007 movie starts turning over cameras. So even before they even start filming, she says this is because they are wanting to reinvent Bond. She actually says nobody's in the running. Of course, that doesn't mean nobody's in the running. She's saying that, but of course people will be in the running. She says, we're working out where to go with him. There isn't a script, and we can't come up with one until we decide how we're going to approach the next film, because really it's a reinvention. We're reinventing who he is, and that takes time. I'd say that filming is at least 2 years away. It's not to get too much further away. We're talking about films that are going to be made when we're dead. If, like us, you were an enormous fan of Mare of Easttown, we loved Mare of Easttown. It was a slow build, but a dramatic slow build, starring Kate Winslet for HBO Max. If you haven't seen it, check it out, Mare of Easttown. It was really, really good, really, really layered, really meaningful, really gritty, really real and dramatic, and she won an Emmy for that. Well, she signed up to a new HBO limited series, and it sounds intriguing, this one. It's called Trust, and it's based on Hernan Diaz's 2022 novel of the same name, Trust. Here's the blurb on the book. The book is about a wealthy financier who's dissatisfied by a novel that's been written based on his life, and he's frustrated with his wife's portrayal. So he asks the secretary to ghost write it and set the record straight. But the secretary grows uncomfortable, aware that he's essentially rewriting history, and he's also rewriting his wife's place in it. It's a film or a story that's told in 4 different voices. Trust is going to be who can we trust, whose narrative is true. I suppose we're going to be playing with timelines, storylines, perspectives, points of view, all that kind of stuff. You know, questions around the notions of what is truth, what is the truth, and who gets to define the truth. So I think it sounds like a rich prospect, and I think Kate Winslet has really found her groove in these kind of earthy, gravelly, sort of gritty, thought-provoking little limited series. So that's her next series. It's a new series for HBO called Trust. Over at Netflix, meanwhile, Hugh Grant. Who doesn't like a bit of Hugh Grant? I like a bit of Hugh Grant. I think we all like a bit of Hugh Grant. Everyone likes a bit of Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant will be playing Zeus. No bigger role, really. It's almost like playing God, isn't it? And a new Greek mythology series for Netflix called Chaos, spelled K-A-O-S. He's joining other luminaries, other actors, such as Janet McTeer, who's brilliant as the lawyer in Ozark. David Thewlis, just fabulously creepy, weird, offbeat performer, actor, and even actresses like Billie Piper, who's also going to be in this. This is billed as a bold, darkly comic take on Greek mythology. It sounds to me a little bit like Netflix's answer to American Gods, the Neil Gaiman series, which I believe was on Prime. They're going to be looking at a bunch of inconstant gods and their cosmic machinations. So Grant will be playing Zeus in there. I fancy a bit of that sort of Clash of the Titans and all that kind of stuff. But I think they're going to have to make a clear decision not to go down the same route as American Gods. They need something distinctly different. And in other news, it's not really news, although is it news? Are you a Cameron Diaz fan? I think I'm a Cameron Diaz fan. I mean, I loved her in There's Something About Mary. I loved her in that. I mean, obviously the infamous what can you say, spunk in the hair, I suppose. That's the only way you can put it. It's no ruder than what they actually put in the film. Something About Mary, Being John Malkovich. What else? What Happens in Vegas, Gangs of New York, Charlie's Angels, obviously, the relaunch, and Shrek, which is very good in Shrek. Well, Cameron Diaz has said she's coming out of retirement. She's coming out of retirement. I didn't know she'd gone into retirement, actually. I just thought she'd stopped filming stuff. She's in a new movie, Netflix movie called Back in Action. She's going to be starring alongside Jamie Foxx, who I believe was she not in Annie? I think she was in a remake of Annie with Jamie Foxx. Huge Jamie Foxx fan. Jamie Foxx himself teased the new project on Twitter with an audio clip of a phone conversation with Cameron Diaz, who confesses that she's so excited but anxious about getting back into acting. I don't know how to do this, So basically she's really playing on the idea that she's been pulled out of retirement. They're pulling the band back together, and she's going to be starring in a brand new comedy, action comedy for Netflix. I have to confess, I'm getting a little bit... Don't you think there were a bit too many of these sort of generic, non-specific, not particularly clever, sophisticated or complicated, even in a sort of mainstream entertaining fashion, Netflix shows? I mean, I think they need to do better than action comedies or just thrillers. And, The Grey Man doesn't drag me in at all, and it's cost them a fortune. Surely at some point someone has to say, we've got to put the money in other things. I think Netflix need to think more indie, with the potential to get blockbusters out of indiness rather than going for just big budgets and getting what I call almost bachelor fodder. These are almost like films that are just on in the background whilst an estate agent takes photos of a bachelor pad. Do you know what I mean? It looks good on the screen to have the Grey Man up whilst we take photographs of this apartment to sell. It's that kind of thing. Which brings me to Films of the Week. And of course, Films of the Week this week is kind of films of this week, but also a film of last week. The most notable release, obviously, in the last 10 days is Elvis, the biopic, or not biopic, by Baz Luhrmann. What you're going to be promised there, absolutely. Many of you have already seen it, I know, because my DMs are full of people saying, have you seen it? When are you going to see it? When are you going to review it? You're going to get camp, you're going to get over the top, it's going to be Vegas, it's going to be as much about Baz Luhrmann as it's going to be about Elvis Presley. And as I hear, it's going to be as much about Tom Hanks as his erstwhile sort of malevolent, evil kind of manager. It's as much about him as it is about Elvis. And so I'm curious to see how that balance works. I'm more intrigued to see whether this is a film about Elvis, that's being sold as a film about Elvis. And does Austin Butler give us more than just an impersonation? I've read a few reviews that compare it to Bohemian Rhapsody. I know a lot of people like Bohemian Rhapsody. I want more than just an impersonation, though. So I'm intrigued to see whether it delivers that. So you've got Elvis, that's on everywhere at the moment. Another big film this week, released this week, is Night Tram, which is Martin backwards. Night Tram is a film starring Caleb Landry Jones, fabulous sort of indie actor. You'd know him probably best as the brother of the girlfriend that Daniel Kaluuya's character visits in Get Out. He's the lunatic brother in Get Out. It also stars Judy Davis and Essie Davis. It's directed by Justin Kurzel, who directed The True History of the Kelly Gang. He's got a singular visual style, very Australian indie sentiment. We've seen Night Tram. I've seen Night Tram. A review will be landing on the channel. But this is the story. It's based on the story of Martin Bryant, who was responsible for a mass shooting, or what they call the 1996 Port Arthur massacre in Tasmania, Australia. And it's a kind of character portrait of this Martin guy called Night Tram in this, because apparently, allegedly, it's said that people would never repeat his name in Australian sort of culture. So thus they've reversed his name. And so really, it's a character portrait played by Caleb Landry Jones. As I say, we'll give a review about the sort of the run up to and the character development and the origin story of someone who took the lives of, I think, about 36 people. The Black Phone, another film that was released last week, is a sort of supernatural psychological horror type film. It stars Ethan Hawke. It's directed by Scott Derrickson, who I believe directed the first the first Doctor Strange. This is set in 1978, and a serial child abductor called the Grabber prowls the streets of Denver, and I think Ethan Hawke obviously plays the Grabber. And this is really the story of an abducted teenager who then manages to communicate with previous victims of the Grabber. So if you fancy being unsettled and fancy a bit of a malevolent turn from Mr. Ethan Hawke, who says he relished and really enjoyed playing the part, then I think The Black Phone is for you. Perhaps a good late nighter. And for families, any family viewing, kids, you've got young kids, Minions: The Rise of Gru comes out. This is the sequel to Minions, which itself was a spin-off from the Despicable Me franchise films. This film also stars the voiceover talents of Steve Carell as Gru, and we're going to see all the Minions. We love the Minions, all getting up to all sorts of kind of comedic sort of madness and stupidity and silliness. This is doing incredibly well, actually, at the box office in America, and many other reviews I've read have said it's great, fun, silly, entertaining, sort of, popcorn sort of fodder for youngsters and adults alike. There's enough in there to keep you entertained. So if you've got to take the kids to the cinema, you could do well to go and see this, because I think you'll be entertained too. And there you have the weekly rushes. We missed you last week. Your rushed rush through all your weekly movie and streaming news. I hope you have a fantabulous weekend watching films or streaming stuff and just making your eyes go square.
For more film and family fun, don't forget to click the subscribe button and make sure to click the bell to never miss an update.